The starship Eclipse drifted silently through the void, its hull glinting faintly under the light of a distant sun. It was a vessel of war, a relic of the Galactic Union's efforts to suppress the rebellious Sarathians, a species deemed too dangerous to be left unchecked. Among its prisoners was Kayla Vera, a Zarathian woman whose defiance had made her a symbol of resistance. Her capture had been celebrated as a victory by the Union, but now, days into her imprisonment, her cries echoed unheard through the cold, metallic corridors of the ship. Kayla was not like the others. Her species, known for their telepathic abilities, had been systematically silenced by the Union's neural dampeners. These devices, implanted in the base of her skull, severed her connection to the collective consciousness of her people. Alone in her mind, Kayla felt a pain deeper than the physical wounds inflicted by her captors. Her cries were not just of anger or despair. They were a plea for connection, for understanding, for someone to hear her in a universe that had turned its back on her kind. But no one heard her. Not the guards who patrolled the corridors, not the scientists who monitored her vitals, and certainly not the Union officers who saw her as nothing more than a trophy. Her telepathy, once a source of strength, was now a curse, amplifying her isolation. The dampeners ensured that her thoughts remained trapped within her own mind, a prison within a prison. Days passed. Kayla's cries grew weaker, her spirit fraying at the edges. She had always been a fighter, but even the strongest could only endure so much. She began to wonder if this was how it would end, not in a blaze of glory, but in the suffocating silence of a Union cell. Dr. Elias Carter was not supposed to care. As the Eclipse's chief medical officer, his job was to keep the prisoners alive, not to listen to them. He had seen countless species come through the ship's brig, each one a reminder of the Union's relentless expansion. He had long since learned to bury his emotions, to focus on the task at hand. But something about Kayla Vera was different. It started with her vitals. The readings were erratic, her heart rate spiking and plummeting in ways that defied explanation. At first, Elias dismissed it as a side effect of the neural dampeners. But as the days went on, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. He began to spend more time in the observation room, watching her through the one-way glass. She was always silent, her face a mask of defiance, but her eyes told a different story. They were filled with a pain that went beyond the physical. One night, unable to sleep, Elias found himself standing outside her cell. The guards had long since grown accustomed to his presence and didn't question him as he entered. Kayla looked up as the door slid open, her eyes narrowing in suspicion. She said nothing, but Elias could feel the weight of her gaze. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said, his voice soft. I want to understand." Kayla tilted her head, studying him. For a moment, there was silence. Then, to his surprise, she spoke. Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, but it carried a strength that belied her condition. "You want to understand?" she said. "Then take off the dampeners. Let me show you what your Union has done to my people." Elias hesitated. The dampeners were there for a reason. Without them, Kayla's telepathy could pose a threat to the ship's crew. But as he looked into her eyes, he saw something that made him question everything he had been taught. He saw not a monster, but a woman who had been pushed to the brink. Against his better judgment, he reached for the control panel on the wall. With a few keystrokes, the dampeners deactivated. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, Kayla's eyes fluttered shut, and Elias felt a strange pressure in his mind. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, like a floodgate had been opened. Images flashed before his eyes, memories that weren't his own. He saw Kayla's homeworld, a planet of vibrant colors and towering spires. He saw her people, their minds intertwined in a web of shared thoughts and emotions. He saw the Union's ships descending from the sky, their weapons tearing through the spires, reducing them to rubble. He felt the fear, the anger, the despair as the Zarathians were rounded up and imprisoned, their connection to one another severed. And then he felt Kayla's pain. It was a pain that went beyond the physical, a deep, aching loneliness that had been festering for years. It was the pain of being cut off from everything she had ever known, of being forced to endure in silence. When the connection broke, Elias stumbled back, his breath coming in short gasps. He looked at Kayla, his eyes wide with shock. She was watching him, her expression unreadable. "Now you understand," she said. Elias nodded, his mind reeling. He had always believed in the Union's mission, in the idea that they were bringing order to a chaotic galaxy. But now he wasn't so sure. How could something so cruel be justified? Over the next few days, Elias found himself drawn to Kayla's cell. He brought her food, water, and medical supplies, but more than that, he brought her companionship. They talked for hours, sharing stories of their lives, their hopes, their fears. Kayla told him about her people, about their culture and their history. Elias told her about his life before the Union, about the family he had left behind. As they talked, Elias began to see the galaxy in a new light. He saw the Union not as a force for good, but as a machine that crushed anything that stood in its way. And he saw Kayla not as a prisoner, but as a person who had been wronged, who deserved a chance to fight back. One night, as they sat together in her cell, Kayla looked at him with a fierce determination in her eyes. "Help me," she said. "Help me escape." Elias hesitated. He knew what she was asking. If he helped her, he would be betraying everything he had ever known. He would be labeled a traitor, hunted by the Union for the rest of his life. But as he looked at her, he knew he couldn't say no. "Okay," he said. "I'll help you." The plan was risky, but it was their only chance. Using his access as the ship's medic, Elias disabled the security systems in the brig and smuggled Kayla out of her cell. They moved quickly and quietly through the ship's corridors, avoiding the patrols and cameras. Every step was a gamble, every second a potential disaster. But they made it. When they reached the escape pods, Elias turned to Kayla, his heart pounding in his chest. "This is it," he said. "Once you're out, there's no turning back." Kayla nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you," she said, "for hearing me." Elias smiled, a bittersweet ache in his chest. "Go," he said. "Find your people. Tell them they're not alone." Kayla stepped into the escape pod, the door sliding shut behind her. As the pod launched into the void, Elias watched it go, a sense of peace settling over him. He didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, he felt like he had done something right. Kayla's pod drifted through space, its trajectory set for a distant Zarathian colony. As she looked out at the stars, she felt a flicker of hope. She didn't know if her people would welcome her, if they would even remember her. But she knew one thing for certain. She was no longer alone. And somewhere, deep in the void, a human medic smiled, knowing that he had finally heard her cry.